You're listening to Convenience Matters, brought to you by NACS. Whether it's for food, fuel, drinks, or snacks, about half the U.S. population shops at a convenience store every day. We'll talk about what we see at stores and what the future may hold for our industry.
Welcome to Convenience Matters. My name is Donovan Woods, and I'm with the Fuels Institute and NACS, and I'm here with my guest.
My name is John Eichberger, also with the Fuels Institute and NACS, and it's great to be here with everybody and you, Donovan.
So, John, we have two guests with us here today that I think our audience is going to want to listen to because something comes up everywhere we go, at least in our Fuels Institute life, and that is new fuels, alternative fuels. And if you're a retailer, when do you do that?
Yeah, they were guests of ours at the NACS show on a session looking at when to bring new fuels to market. We've got Mike Lorenz with Sheets and Matt Spackman with Come and Go, both members of the Fuels Institute Board of Advisors. Gentlemen, thank you guys very much for being with us today.
Absolutely.
Thank you, John.
So I guess the first thing, let's start off. We'll start off with Mike and go to Matt. Can you kind of give the listeners a little kind of quick synopsis of why did we invite you guys to talk about different fuels?
Well, first I'd like to say I'm a long-time listener, first-time guest. Honestly,
Love it.
So you know what? We can fix
true.
that. We can fix that.
No, I love it. I actually do. So we are currently the leading retailer of E15 in the country. So we have 240 stores, which is about 40% of our total stores. So we've been doing this for going on 3 years.
Yeah.
We're also putting in electric chargers. We have E85 at all the sites that we have E15. So, we're pretty immersed, I think, in alternative fuels at this point. Biofuel as well, or biodiesel, I should say, as well. So we've got a bit of experience and we've got a lot of learnings, a lot of mistakes along the way, but we're learning as we go.
And Matt, you guys also have a pretty diversified portfolio, right?
Yeah, we're in a similar situation to Mike and Sheets where we sell E85, E15. We started selling E85 in 1997, and we've been selling E15 since about 2015, and we're also beginning to explore the EV space.
Yeah. So when we did the session at the NACS show, I told the audience, I'm tired of talking about electric vehicles. Let's start with the liquid fuels. I'm going to flip it this time. Let's talk about electric vehicles. Every time I go somewhere, the question I get more than anything is, John, what's the pace of electric vehicle market penetration? And is it going to take away all my business? So Matt, can you share a little bit about what your guys' thoughts are about adding EV chargers? What has been your experience, and why did you guys decide to do this now?
So that's a really complicated question, the question of when we think electric vehicles will actually start impacting our liquid fuels business. And we've done a lot of work internally with modeling and with the data that are publicly available. And we do think it will happen, but we think we're decades away, probably a couple decades away at least, where it will start truly impacting the business. But as I said, we're putting in charging stations now, and there are a few reasons for that. One of them is that there are funds available, publicly available funds for electric charger installations. And there are also third-party groups that are willing to assist us in putting those in at this point also. The other factor that we're taking into account is the fact that as we stake our claim to real estate along interstates and other commuter thoroughfares, we will be able to have our chargers in there in place and learning prior to our competition.
Yeah, and Mike, what about you guys? You had mentioned in the session at the NACS show that you guys were partnering with several groups.
Right. Well, first off, the interesting thing about electric chargers, when you say what's the time horizon, I agree with Matt. I think it's a fair ways out there, but it's unbelievable. Depending on who I talk to, I can be bullish or bearish. I mean, literally, I'll take the one person to think like really pro, EVs are coming tomorrow. Right. And then the next person, it's like, they're out there maybe 20, 30 years. So I go back and forth on that. But, as Matt said as well, we're taking advantage of, the partnerships. I mean, we're not putting a lot of capital expenditure at this point, so it's low risk from that standpoint. When we first put in the first 5 chargers, we had a grant from the Pennsylvania state grant. And we learned a lot. The one thing that we learned is we didn't want to do it ourselves because it was a total nightmare, to be honest with you. Trying to maintain that equipment, keep it running. If you had customer complaints, we had to field them. With the partners that we have, we're working with EVgo, we're working with Electrify America and Tesla. They're handling it all. I mean, it's turnkey. They're handling it now. I think I may have mentioned this morning is that, we may forego revenue a revenue stream in the future. But at this point in time, it's low risk. It's getting us involved. We think we're partnered with good partners. And we're providing another service for companies. And to be honest with you, I think the most surprising thing is the number of chargers. We do know people are actually using the chargers. So they're not sitting there idle and just collecting rust. They're actually being used. So that's good news.
Even though it's not your investment, it's a good thing they're not just sitting there idle.
Yep.
Right. No,
Right.
so people are using them.
Yeah.
Now, Mike, I've been out there to where you're from, out there in the Pennsylvania area, as well as we went to a football game together at Penn State.
Yes.
And I'm thinking about that terrain, that area where you're just driving and there seems to be nothing, and then, bam, you're at Penn State. With that type of environment, those types of customers, how will you even know that the EVs have arrived in terms of your customers owning them? What are you doing to kind of take a barometer of what your customer is driving?
Well, the great thing about Tesla is they have an incredible network. And when they put in a new charger, they will send that out to all their customers. Mm-hmm. So we've got people that were actually traveling from Canada to Florida, and we put a chargers in at Breezewood, Pennsylvania, which is kind of the intersection of 70 and the Turnpike, which is a great location for chargers. And the amazing thing about it is people were calling us, waiting for those to be commissioned because they were planning a trip and they were planning on stopping there.
Right.
So at least the Tesla network, they've got a great way to communicate with all their customers. When new stores or stations are opening up, so that's great.
There seems to be no disdain in your voice when you say Tesla, and I appreciate that, because not so much that I'm pro Tesla or anti,
Right.
but just they would be considered competition, and you're not running away from it. You're actually embracing and seeing whatever that may be, because it's going to affect your customers.
That's a good point. I mean, you can look at them as an adversary, but they're not, and we're not going to be able to stop change.
Right.
I think that's a good point, Donovan, is that you have to embrace change. You got to go with the flow, because you're not going to stop. If EVs are coming, they're coming. Get on board.
So Matt, to that point, it's a lot of retailers. We've had some people reach out to us at the Fuels Institute and ask, hey, we want to install chargers. Can you put us in touch with convenience retailers? We want to put some chargers. And a lot of convenience retailers won't return our calls. Yeah, we're not interested in that. So with that in mind, EVs do take fuel gallons away. So if you're adding an EV charger to your station, are you just expanding your portfolio, or are you enabling the enemy?
My perspective is that electric charge is another form of fuel, and we provide fueling for people's vehicles, whether those be electric or liquid fuels. It will eventually affect the liquid fuel business that we do, but as Mike said, there's nothing we can do to change that, so we've either got to embrace it and learn how to monetize it, or we'll be left behind. So I know there may be some retailers that take the perspective that they're going to resist, but you can't resist change.
Yeah, I think it's I believe on the slow growth side of EVs, the analyses I've done, the Fuels Institute has done, kind of don't lead me to believe it's going to be rapid growth, at least in the next 10, 15 years. After that, it might accelerate. But I think it's important to service your customers. Right. Whatever they need, you're in the business of convenience. Make it easy for them.
And we don't just sell fuel. There are some products inside the store.
Really?
There are. Yep, lots of them.
Wow, I learned something new.
See, every time we have a podcast.
I'm so fuel focused.
Well, I think the other interesting thing is, Tesla is an example, but the other companies are building out a network.
Right.
So every store, you're not going to have EV chargers at every location. It's a network. So we want to be part of that fabric and part of that network, because at one point in time, the network's going to be complete and the money's going to dry up. So we figured join now.
Yep.
That is key. The money will dry up. It will not always be there.
Eventually.
But you know what? Even beyond the money, because I'm thinking with your companies that you're more than a few stores for both of you. There may be someone listening who has 1 store, 5 stores, and they're thinking, well, of course those guys can afford to experiment. But the great thing about being at the NACS show, or being associated with NACS, it's one industry where I've seen that competitors inside, in terms of different retailers, you information share without any problem. You tell stories and let people know how it works and your wins and your losses. So have you seen that being a benefit to you? And could you elaborate on the fact that, and I'll go to you, Matt,
Sure.
how information sharing is beneficial?
Well, I'll give you an example. I've spoken with Mike on the phone about his experience with electric chargers when we were starting to reinvestigate it. We put in chargers years ago, 2008, and then kind of got out of it. There were no cars to charge at that time. But then when we started really experimenting with it again, I got on the phone with Mike, and he was very willing to share. And certainly that's been my experience in the industry, is that there aren't a lot of people that we wouldn't share with, you know.
So let's shift back to liquid for a while, because that's what we sell the predominance of. We're going to continue to be using liquid fuels to power our transportation as the majority fuel source for a long time. Both your companies are engaged in selling E15. There is a lot of debate whether we should be doing E15, whether it's good for the customer or it's good for the engine. Matt, start with you. Why E15?
Well, from our perspective, there are a number of reasons. One of them is that our company has been committed to being an environmentally friendly company since it was founded back in 1959. We believe that ethanol fuels are better on the environment than other liquid forms of fuel. There are also other advantages from an E15 standpoint. It is a fuel that is good for the engine as well, and it performs well. And then finally, we can give a discount to the consumer on E15. There are benefits we receive, and we can pass those on to the customer, and certainly they appreciate that.
Okay, so Mike, now, Matt is headquartered in Des Moines, Iowa. I used to work for an Iowa congressman. I was the guy who's pushing ethanol mandates in Capitol Hill. I understand come and go wanting to go to ethanol. Pennsylvania, you guys are heavily involved in E15.
Yes, we are. So our reason is, part of our brand promise is to provide the customer with quality products, a selection of quality products. So we see E15 as providing a great value proposition to the consumer. I mean, it's, as Matt said, we can currently sell it for less. It's higher octane, and it's cleaner burning. So it's clearly a better alternative than 87. Mm-hmm. And that's why we're offering it now. From other advantages, we see that it's a differentiator. Not a lot of people are offering it, so we see that as a potential, competitive advantage. And then we also have, it could build loyalty, and it's also increasing sales. We look at our sales, and overall sales at the stores that have E15 have increased. Mm-hmm. So not only we sold E15, but we're selling E85, and like I said, overall gasoline sales have increased, which is a good thing, because with the projection that gasoline demand overall is going to go down in the future, trying to even hang on to market share rather than grow market share is a good thing. So,
but it takes to go into E15. Not everybody can just start selling E15. You have to worry about equipment compatibility. There's a restriction on selling in certain markets in the summer months. So, I mean, Matt, what have you guys been doing? How did you guys make sure you had the right equipment? How did you make sure you're doing the right thing? And then, switch over to Mike then. What do you do in the summer months when you're not allowed to sell E15 to some of your customers? So, Matt?
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier that we got into E85 in 1997. So the advantage that we had was we had built an infrastructure that was compatible with E85. Once you're compatible with E85, you're compatible with E15. So you got the right kind of tanks. We've got blender pumps that enable us to take the street grade and the E85, blend them together to get to the E15 product that we sell. We have separate handles for the E15 and for the E85 products that we sell. So we had that infrastructure in place. We got a lot of that through funding from federal and state sources. And that was something that is not as readily available today. And so you're right, it can be challenging for a retailer who's wanting to move into that product. Mm-hmm. But there are still funds available. We've seen them even this year.
And then, Mike, we've got less than 2,000 stores selling E15 in the country. I've talked to some chains to say, look, I would love to sell E15, but that summer restriction, until that's gone, I can't do it. So what's been your experience with dealing with that regulatory hurdle and how the customers reacted to it?
It's a huge barrier for retailers, without a doubt. I mean, it's probably one of the biggest barriers for new retailers for getting in. Matt and I were already in, right? And so we're increasing our offer on E15. What we have to do to deal with that is, come May, we actually relabel all of our dispensers and say that instead of being able to buy that fuel for 2001 or newer vehicles, you can only buy it if you have a flex fuel vehicle until September 15. So you're losing 3.5 months of sales. Sales drop off dramatically during that period of time. We're hopeful that E15 eventually gets the benefit of the 1 pound waiver. Mm-hmm. And we can sell it, year round. So we're keeping our fingers crossed, and hopefully that eventually happens.
Now, with anything with change, you need to educate. And when you're talking about your consumers, EVs, it's easy to clearly say what you need to do to educate them, and it's a little bit simpler when it comes to different liquid fuels, what does Sheets or Come and Go do when it comes to teaching your consumer, your customer, why you're putting in a certain fuel?
Well, I'll just start. I mean, when we first introduced E15, we just basically put it out there, and we were selling it for less. As you know, the consumer is pretty highly sensitive to pricing when it comes to gasoline. So a lot of people just found it on their own because they saw the cheaper price and just started using it. So we used that as the main driver is price. But we also created, at the same time, we created a brochure to explain what E15 was. And when we set out to create the brochure, what we realized right away is most people didn't realize they were getting E10. Because there's nothing that calls it out as E10, which is amazing. I mean, so you may see on the dispenser it says contains up to 10% ethanol or may contain up to 10% ethanol, but nothing calls it out as E10. So once you understand E10, then you understand E15 and E85. So the brochure set out to explain what E10 was, which is 97% of the fuel that's sold in the U.S. today, and then explain E15 and E85 and the limitations to using that. You needed a car that was 2001 or newer, or you needed a flex-fuel vehicle. So, if anyone had any questions, we were hoping that the price hooked them, and then that they looked into it. Can I use this for my vehicle? Got a brochure and learned more.
Very nice. What about you, Matt?
I think that's one of the biggest challenges with any new fuel.
Right.
Is that education. It's fuel for most people is a low engagement product. Right. And so, we can make a distinction between educating people about the product itself or educating them about whether they can use it. And our experience is that the consumer is primarily interested in, can I put it in my car? And so we have really recently turned to educating our store associates. So just enough so that they can answer the question, can a consumer put this in their car, or how would we know if this particular consumer can put it in their car? And that's where we've begun concentrating our efforts, because I don't think many consumers are interested in really knowing about the fuel itself.
Very true.
So we've got a couple minutes left. So last question for each of you, and Matt, we'll start with you. If you're talking right now through Convenience Matters to fuel retailers, what advice do you have for them, each of you, in terms of if you're thinking about how to possibly go into a new fuel or considering it, what advice do you have for them before they make the decision?
It's a big decision because in many cases it's a large investment. So if you want to put a charger in on an existing site, you're going to break up concrete. That's very expensive. If you want to start selling E15 or E85, you have to have the right dispensing equipment, the right tank equipment, etc. So it's a big investment. I would say do your research up front. Look for third-party funding sources because they are out there and available. And there are partners out there that are wanting to participate or partner with convenience stores, and I would say take advantage of that, certainly.
Mike?
The thing that I would add is there is a difference if you're building a new store. Because if you're building a new store, then all the equipment's going to be compatible. And you can build in infrastructure, give you flexibility in the future, like put in baffled tanks, put in the underground piping so you don't have to go back and break concrete, or even conduit to the perimeter to potentially put in chargers in the future. So if you're building new stores, I think that you're making a big mistake if you don't do that, because it's a lot cheaper to do it when you build the store than it is to go back and retrofit it. Now, if you're talking in an existing store, it's a different story. As Matt said, it can get pretty expensive, and it's going to vary from case to case how expensive that's going to be. But you may have to upgrade your tanks anyway. That would be the opportunity, or your dispensers if you have to go to EMV or something like that. That would be an opportunity to take that, to get a dual blender and put that in at that point in time. So, there's a lot of different, possibilities, but I think if you have the opportunity, either you have money or you're building a new store or you're having to upgrade an existing store, I think it's smart to go ahead and make those upgrades.
I think the only thing I'd add to that, since we're all sitting here, you guys on the board, people should pay attention to the Fuels Institute. fuelsinstitute.org. We're doing a lot of research, a lot of articles, a lot of analysis of what's going on in the market, trends, stay aware of the trends, stay aware of the options, network with people in the industry, and learn from each other. So, Mike, Matt, thank you guys so much for joining us on Convenience Matters, sharing your perspective, your history. And Donovan, it's been a joy. And ladies and gentlemen, we look forward to talking to you next time on the next episode of Convenience Matters.
Convenience Matters is brought to you by NACS and produced in partnership with Human Factor. For more information, visit convenience.org.